This story was narrated by VidCrew Media. Please show your support by like and subscribe. Thank you. At the Brookspring International Airport, a young man in simple attire, carrying a plain backpack, slowly walked toward the entrance of the airport. His name was Gavin Clifford, once the eldest son of the prestigious Clifford family, which was known as the first family in the country. But this day, no one was there to greet him. He had not informed anyone of his return. It seemed like he didn't want to make a big fuss. Perhaps he was tired of the complicated life. However, just as Gavin stepped through the security gate, the previously silent security machines suddenly emitted a piercing alarm. Beep, 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 beep. After the piercing alarm sounded, everyone was taken aback. In the next second, the armed security personnel at the security gate swiftly drew their guns and surrounded Gavin. Gavin looked at the security personnel, who were on high alert, with an expression that revealed a sense of resignation, as if he had long been accustomed to it. At that moment, a cold voice came from a woman in uniform. "Sir, hands up. Please cooperate with our inspection." It was a stunning woman in a uniform, with a short skirt and a pair of straight and sexy legs. She looked very attractive under the lights of the security hall. Coupled with her uniform, she was able to make all men crazy. However, Gavin remained indifferent, showing little change in his expression. He raised his hands slightly and said in a casual tone of voice, "Actually, I." Before Gavin could finish his sentence, the attractive security woman snapped, not giving him a chance to speak. "Sir, please cooperate with our inspection." "Fine." Gavin helplessly shrugged and then asked, "All right, what should I do?" "Please remove your jacket right now." The beautiful security woman furrowed her eyebrows, her eyes filled with utmost seriousness and determination as she spoke. "All right, since you said so," Gavin muttered under his breath. He had intended to return to the country quietly, not making a fuss, so he complied. After saying that, he took off his jacket and threw it forward. Immediately, a security guard picked up Gavin's jacket and thoroughly inspected it inside and out with a metal detector. However, he found nothing unusual. "Sir." On the other side, the attractive security woman still had a serious expression on her pretty face as she loudly said, "Please remove all of your upper garments." Gavin looked at the woman in front of him, sighing slightly with a hint of helplessness, but he still did as she asked. "Oh, what the?" The sound of cold air being sucked in suddenly echoed through the entire airport security hall. Scars. He was covered in scars. There were all kinds of them. Knife wounds, gunshot wounds. They snaked and sprawled across Gavin's strong upper body, turning his originally muscular and aesthetically pleasing physique into a somewhat ferocious and terrifying appearance. Even the attractive security woman couldn't help but swallow, and her face turned pale at the sight. On the other side, the metal detector once again scanned all the clothes that Gavin had taken off. However, no abnormalities were found. "What's going on?" The attractive security woman's eyes were filled with deep confusion. She bit her lip as if contemplating something. Her beautiful eyes then lit up slightly, and she immediately said, "Bring the infrared scanner over and check for any abnormalities inside his body." This attractive security woman seemed to be some kind of leader in the security hall. The security personnel around her all obeyed her every command. Soon, someone brought over a 6-foot-tall infrared scanner. This scanner could scan a person's entire body from head to toe. Just as Gavin stood in front of the scanner, the entire security hall fell into silence. In the next second, the security personnel exclaimed, It's shrapnel." The security personnel's face turned pale. His pupils filled with an incredulous look, and his voice trembled as he stuttered. So many pieces of shrapnel. How could someone like him still be alive? The instant he finished speaking, he covered his mouth with both hands, nervously looking at Gavin standing in front of the machine, as if afraid that his words would anger Gavin. All the security personnel put down their guns at this moment, including the attractive security woman. They all looked at the image displayed on the infrared scanner screen, and their hearts filled with astonishment. How is this possible? How can he have so many pieces of shrapnel in his body? This shouldn't be. Look, there's even a piece of shrapnel next to his heart. Is this guy really that lucky? The surrounding people's astonished voices were met with indifference from Gavin, the man at the center of people's attention. He looked very calm, as if the shrapnel inside his body belonged to someone else. At that moment, a hint of apology appeared on the face of the attractive security woman. She looked somewhat embarrassed. She took the clothes that Gavin had taken off and handed them back to him before speaking up. "Sir, I'm sorry. I didn't know about you." "It's all right." Gavin simply waved his hand, clearly not wanting to dwell on this issue. But Gavin's aloof attitude only piqued the curiosity of this attractive security woman even more. She directly extended her delicate hand toward Gavin and said, "Hello, sir. My name is Violet Jordan. May I know where you were injured so severely?" Gavin seemed to have completely ignored the fair and tender hand extended by Violet. He put on his jacket. His voice was low and calm as he replied, "During the Sunspire resistance." "Hat." After Gavin's words fell, a gasp echoed through the entire hall once again. "The Sunspire resistance. He's the war hero from 10 years ago. If it weren't for the hero who defended Sunspire back then, we wouldn't have our current kingdom of Bleris. He's so young, yet he participated in the Sunspire resistance." The surrounding exclamations grew louder, and the gazes directed at Gavin became solemn and respectful. As for Violet, the attractive security woman, her gaze toward Gavin underwent a drastic change. Even her pupils started to tremble violently. A complex emotion seemed to appear in her eyes. In the next second, Violet saluted Gavin with a standard military salute. Not only she, but all the security personnel present also treated Gavin with the utmost respect and courtesy. However, Gavin seemed to ignore everything around him, calmly picking up his backpack and turning to Violet. "Can I go now?" he asked. "You can leave anytime." Violet's voice was firm and resolute. As Gavin left, Violet's beautiful eyes seemed to be glued to him, unable to look away. She kept watching his figure until it disappeared through the airport gates. A hint of surprise then appeared in her eyes, followed by a strong emotion that was a mixture of curiosity and admiration. At that moment, Gavin had returned to the Clifford Villa, the place he remembered from his past. But a loud thud sounded as Gavin dropped his backpack heavily to the ground. The sound echoed through the empty halls of the mansion, a haunting reminder of the life that once thrived within its walls. His pupils trembled. His eyes filled with teary redness as he stared in disbelief at the ruins before him. His trembling pupils darted around, desperately trying to make sense of the devastation before him. Yes, it was ruins. The once prestigious Clifford family, the greatest family in the country, had become dilapidated. The weight of the realization hit him like a tidal wave, threatening to drown him in despair. He rushed into the mansion as if possessed. His footsteps echoed through the empty corridors. Each step felt like a stab to his heart, as if the very foundation of his identity was crumbling beneath him. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his chest heaved with a mix of anticipation and dread. What met his eyes were rows and rows of unguarded graves. The names of the Clifford family members were on top of each grave. A faint smell of blood lingered in the air, and the ground of the Clifford villa was stained dark red, as if it had witnessed a river of blood that couldn't fade even after all these years. Gavin's body trembled violently, and his bloodshot eyes filled with deep sorrow, as if what lay before him were piles of corpses and a pool of blood. The weight of the tragedy pressed down upon him. His heartache manifested in every fiber of his being. Tears streamed down his face, carving a path through the dirt and grime that coated his cheeks. He never expected that after 10 years of absence, when he finally returned to his longed-for home, it had turned into a desolate cemetery. His mind raced with a torrent of emotions, a monologue of grief and disbelief playing out within his thoughts. How could this have happened? The weight of the unanswered questions threatened to suffocate him as he struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the loss before him. The yellowed leaves gently brushed against Gavin's cheeks in the wind. In that moment, he stood amidst the ruins of his family's legacy, his heart shattered and his spirit crushed. The home he had once cherished had become a painful reminder, past, a haunting testament to the fragility of life and the depths of sorrow. My home, what happened? Gavin's voice quivered with a mixture of disbelief and anguish, the strain evident in its hoarseness. It was as if he had poured every ounce of his strength into those few words, desperately seeking answers. But at that moment, a piercing scream suddenly tore through the air. Ah, what are you doing? Let me go. Upon hearing the voice, a flicker of recognition finally appeared in Gavin's crimson eyes. His pupils trembled, and his lips moved. It was a voice he knew all too well, one that had once brought him comfort and joy. Zok Zo. Instantly, a loud explosion rang out. The ground beneath Gavin's feet cracked, and he disappeared from the spot immediately. On the other side of a tomb in the Clifford family, a ragged and dirty girl was surrounded by a group of burly men. She sat on the ground in a pitiful state, desperately covering her body with her hands. Tears filled her eyes. Dirt was on her face, giving her a pale and frightened look as she stared at the men in front of her. The men surrounding the girl all had a ferocious expression on their faces, filled with a sense of wickedness and lasciviousness. Among them, a bald man with a smug smile on his face spoke in a harsh voice to the girl on the ground. Well, so you're the last bastard of the Clifford family. Huh. After waiting for so long, we finally found you. Once we're done with you, the Clifford family will be completely wiped out. The young master will definitely reward us greatly for this. You're talking nonsense. The girl's face showed a stubborn and determined expression as she loudly retorted to the bald man. My brother is still alive. When my brother comes back, he will tear you all apart. Upon hearing the girl's words, the people around her were momentarily stunned, but then burst into laughter in unison. Ha ha ha. Your brother? Are you talking about Gavin Clifford? The bald man's face showed a mocking and sneering expression as he spoke. Gavin Clifford died 10 years ago in the Sunspire Resistance. There's no trace of his goddamn corpse anymore. You're lying. My brother didn't die. He didn't die. Tears continued to flow from the girl's eyes, but her tone remained firm and defiant. Boss. At this moment, a skinny man resembling a monkey ran up to the bald man. He first licked his lips while looking at the girl on the ground, and then eagerly spoke to the bald man. Now that we've caught this little girl, it's simple to kill her. But before we do that, you know what I'm talking about, boss. As the skinny man spoke, he touched his belt. You little brat. The bald man kicked the skinny man angrily and said, I'll do it first. All right, boss, you're definitely the first one. Ha ha ha. The bald man looked at the girl on the ground, licking his lips with a flushed face as he walked toward her. As he walked, he unfastened his belt. The girl panicked and asked incoherently, What are you doing? What are you doing? But in the next second, rip. The girl struggled. One of the legs of her worn-out jeans was torn off by the bald man, revealing a large area of her snow-white legs. Seeing this scene, the people around couldn't help but salivate. Ah, get away. Don't touch me. Ha ha ha. The bald man still had that lewd smile on his face as he loudly said, Serve me well, little slut. After saying that, he took off his pants, revealing his grotesque and small member. With his ugly hands, he grabbed the girl's ankle. Just at that moment, whoosh! A loud sound broke the silence as a huge slab of stone shot toward the bald man. The stone slab looked extremely heavy, definitely not something an ordinary person could lift. It was difficult to lift, yet someone managed to send it flying at such a fast speed. It was as if the laws of nature themselves had conspired to unleash this cataclysmic assault. How could anyone muster the strength to wield such an unfathomable object? In the next second, bang! The huge stone slab ruthlessly smashed into the bald man, who was exposing his ugly member. Oof. A crimson tide surged forth. An unyielding torrent of life's essence erupted from the bald man's mouth and nose. His features contorted in agony, and his once formidable countenance was reduced to a mask of pain and despair. The sheer force of the blow catapulted his body backward like a marionette in the hands of an invisible puppeteer. Boss. The onlookers gasped in disbelief. Their voices trembled with a mixture of horror and concern. The sight before them was an affront to their senses, an assault on their understanding of the natural order. The first one to take action was, of course, the skinny man who resembled a monkey. He let out a cry and rushed to the side of the bald man, supporting his boss with a panicked expression. "Boss, are you okay? How are you feeling right now?" At that moment, the bald man's face contorted in agony, his mouth and nose a macabre canvas of crimson. Half of his body was deeply sunken. The life force within him seemed to wane. His body was sinking into a state of profound vulnerability. It seemed that he would die soon. But at that moment, the bald man struggled to raise his arm and pointed in a direction, his finger trembling slightly. Everyone turned their gaze in the direction indicated by the bald man's trembling finger. Their eyes widened in astonishment as they beheld a young man in plain clothes, standing amidst the chaos, as if he had emerged from the very fabric of the universe itself. Moreover, the expression on this young man's face was extremely ferocious, as if he was filled with intense pain and hatred. The weight of his sorrow seemed to hang heavy in the air. It was a palpable force that permeated the surrounding atmosphere. His bloodshot eyes mirrored the depths of his torment, as if he had traversed the darkest recesses of his own soul. At that moment, he seemed to carry within him a burden too immense for words. His expression spoke volumes, a symphony of anguish and wrath that resonated with their own hidden pain. Suddenly, someone shouted loudly at him, "Kid, who the hell are you?" At that moment, the girl who had previously fallen to the ground somehow gathered her strength to get up from the ground and rushed in the direction of the young man, letting out a fierce roar, as if she had used up all her strength. "Gavin!" Her voice was so loud that it even cracked. However, because she was extremely weak, she only took a few steps before she fell straight to the ground again. But this time, she didn't fall directly onto the ground. Instead, she fell into someone's warm embrace. "My brother Gavin." Zoe's voice trembled with a mixture of relief and anguish as she buried her head deep into Gavin's chest. Her fragile frame shook with the weight of her emotions, her two thin arms tightly wrapped around his neck as if afraid to let go. The sound of her crying reverberated through the ruins of the once majestic Clifford Villa, each sob a cathartic release of the pain that had been suppressed within her heart for the past 10 long years. Gavin, his own tears mingling with Zoe's, held her tightly in his embrace. His heart ached as he felt the weight of her suffering, the toll of a decade spent apart etched into every tear-streaked line on her face. With gentle strokes, he patted her back. His touch was a soothing balm to her wounded soul. "Zoe, don't be afraid. I'm back," Gavin whispered softly, his voice a tender reassurance in the midst of their shared turmoil. He knew that mere words could not erase the scars that time had carved into his sister's spirit, but he hoped that his presence would serve as a beacon of solace and strength. Zoe was Gavin's sister. Upon hearing Gavin say, "I'm back," the sound of her crying intensified. Zoe's crying and frail body were telling Gavin the immense suffering she had endured over the past 10 years. "These years you've suffered a lot." Gavin's voice choked up, but Zoe shook her head frantically, lifting her tear-filled eyes to look directly at Gavin as she sobbed. "Gavin, I haven't suffered. I knew it. You didn't die. You wouldn't die. Gavin, you've finally come back. The suffering I've endured, the efforts I've made, everything is worth it." In the end, Zoe's voice was completely drowned out by her crying, and she couldn't utter a word anymore. Her sister was in such a sorry state, but she was still stubbornly trying to comfort him, which made Gavin's heart ache. The reunion of the siblings was a touching scene, but some people didn't want to pay any attention to it. "Hey, are you Gavin Clifford? Are you still alive? Why didn't you die in the Sunspire resistance 10 years ago?" The person speaking was the skinny man. Clearly, after his boss was no longer around, he became the leader of this group. When Gavin heard this voice, he suddenly looked up, and his bloodshot eyes immediately locked onto the skinny man. The skinny man suddenly felt a strange chill coming toward him. He shivered all over, but he didn't think it was because of Gavin's imposing pressure on him. Instead, he pointed his finger provocatively at Gavin. He shouted, "Kid, since you're alive, why didn't you just hide and live a miserable life? How dare you come back?" "Well, you came back at the right moment. Today is just right for killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I'll kill both of you here. We can then consider our mission accomplished." At this point, the tone of the skinny man suddenly changed as he said, "Of course, your sister will definitely die a little later than you. We're gonna have some fun with this young lady. Of course, your little sister will definitely kick the bucket after you. Now, let us fellows take a moment to revel in our leisure." As soon as those words left his lips, an eerie silence descended upon the scene. Several light sounds rang out as these individuals simultaneously drew glistening knives. Their eyes were filled with contempt as they gazed at Gavin. Observing the grim turn of events, Gavin offered a comforting pat on his sister Zoe's back. He guided her gently behind his protective stance. Maintaining a safe distance, he addressed the group that stood before him. He asked in a cold tone of voice, "Why do you want to kill the Clifford family?" "Why?" After hearing what Gavin asked, the thin man across from Gavin, with his lips curling into a mocking smirk, couldn't help but chuckle. With a sinister tone, he replied, "The Clifford family is nothing but dirty vermin, wasting air in this world. Of course, you deserve to die. You should have seen the spectacle when we wiped out the Clifford family back then." Hearing the desperate screams of the Clifford family was truly satisfying. The demise of the Clifford family seemed to bring an inexplicable, sadistic pleasure to these individuals. Obviously, he was enjoying this beautiful moment. At that moment, a man with black-rimmed glasses and a sly expression spoke up with a wicked smile on his face. He asked, "By the way, isn't today Samuel's birthday? We happen to encounter the last two remnants of the Clifford family. If we kill them and bring their heads as a birthday gift to Samuel, he will surely reward us handsomely, won't he?" This remark earned approval from many people in the group. They all thought that what he said made sense. But the thin man added, "Let us not rush ahead of ourselves. First, let us kill Gavin. Then we can savor some amusement with Zoc." Their words made it sound like Gavin and Zoe were already helpless victims to be casually butchered. After Gavin heard their words and saw their mocking smiles, his anger surged uncontrollably. His fury was so intense that it seemed to manifest physically, causing even his hair to bristle. Suddenly, there was a deafening explosion resonated through the air. Zoe's heart raced as she scanned the scene. She noticed Gavin, who had been guarding in front of her, had disappeared. At that moment, he charged swiftly toward the group of people who had gleaming knives. After observing this sudden turn of events, she cried out with a mixture of fear and concern, "Gavin, be careful." But the next moment, her voice came to an abrupt stop. She noticed that Gavin surged into the heart of the group, which numbered over a dozen. Her heart skipped a beat. A sense of foreboding crept into her heart because she knew that there might be very severe consequences. However, instead of being surrounded and beaten by them, he met something entirely unexpected. At that moment, thudding sounds echoed. More than a dozen people attacking Gavin were sent flying. They spewed blood from both their mouths and noses. In the blink of an eye, the entire group lay lifeless on the ground. After seeing what happened, Zoe was left dumbfounded. She couldn't help but wonder how her brother had become so formidable. Only one member of the group remained alive. It was the bald man who had suffered severe bone fractures earlier. Though he was not dead yet, his end was near. At that moment, Gavin approached the bald man step by step. His facial expression remained calm, but his entire being was giving off an intimidating aura. The bald man looked at Gavin with a terrified expression. His face was pale and covered in blood. He couldn't hide his fear as he exclaimed, "Please don't kill me." The primal instinct to survive drove the bald man to speak despite his grievous injuries. As Gavin stood beside the bald man, he looked down at him with cold eyes. His gaze seemed to pierce through the bald man. However, Gavin remained silent, his expression devoid of any warmth. With difficulty, the bald man continued to speak amid the blood oozing from his mouth and nose. The bald man said, "The Clifford family's affairs have nothing to do with me. I'm just following orders. It was Xavier who instructed me to do it. You need to believe me." Suddenly, a light sound could be heard. The bald man's voice was cut off abruptly. When Gavin heard the bald man mention Xavier, he lifted his right foot and brought it down mercilessly upon the man's face. Instantly, the bald man's head exploded. As Zoe watched this ghastly scene unfold from a distance, she couldn't help but feel a surge of nausea clawing at her stomach. She was just a young girl. As she witnessed such a gruesome sight, it naturally triggered her physical reaction. However, there was no trace of sympathy in her eyes. She understood all too well that these individuals deserved to die. At that moment, she composed herself and turned her gaze back to her beloved brother Gavin. She noticed that he was trembling all over, and his breathing was erratic. After seeing that, she couldn't help but feel worried. Without hesitation, she took small, hurried steps toward her brother. Gavin was overwhelmed with rage, and his mind was filled with a single word. It was Xavier. His desire for vengeance was almost uncontrollable. Suddenly, he felt a gentle, cold sensation in the palm of his hand. In the next instant, Gavin's body trembled slightly, and his gaze regained its clarity. After that, he saw his sister. Her face was filled with concern. After Gavin saw that, warmth welled up in his heart. It was a sensation he hadn't experienced in a long time. After that, Gavin's heart calmed down. He turned and embraced his sister. At that moment, the siblings stood there quietly and enjoyed a brief moment of tranquility together. After an unknown amount of time had passed, Gavin realized that Zoe's breathing had become even and tranquil. He realized that Zoe had actually fallen asleep in his arms. He gazed down at his slumbering sister. Zoe's delicate features were now adorned with a glistening tear at the corner of her eye. At that moment, she wore a peaceful smile on her face. Seeing that, Gavin gently touched Zoe's little face with concern. After a while, he bent down and gently carried Zoe. After that, he began to make his way toward the direction of the Clifford villa. However, the place was already a wasteland. Gavin couldn't find a single intact bed or a room without leaks. In one corner, he found a dirty blanket and some expired canned food. After Gavin saw that, it dawned on him that his sister had been enduring hardship in this corner of desolation. After that, his heartache and anger couldn't be contained any longer. His body trembled slightly, and a tear traced its path down his cheek. Coincidentally, this tear landed on Zoe's face, stirring her from her slumber. Zoe hastily opened her eyes. She realized she was lying quietly in her brother's arms. Zoe was slightly relieved. She then nervously spoke up. She asked Gavin, "What's the matter with you?" After hearing Zoe's voice, Gavin quickly wiped the tears from his face. He took a deep breath and reassured her. He said, "I'm fine." After that, he gently placed Zoe back on the ground and looked into her eyes with warmth. He said, "Zoe, just wait here for me. I have to step out for a short while, but I promise I will be back soon." After hearing what Gavin said, Zoe held Gavin's hand anxiously and pleaded, "Gavin, please don't leave me. Are you going away again?" As she spoke, tears welled up in her eyes. It seemed that they were ready to fall once more. But Gavin shook his head and said, "No need to worry, Zoe. I won't leave you again." After hearing that, Zoe continued, "Gavin, can you take me with you? I won't be a bother. I just don't want you to leave me again." Confronted with the hope shining in Zoe's eyes, Gavin couldn't bear to refuse. He reached out and held Zoe's small hand. He said, "All right, we will go together." After Zoe heard her brother's agreement, her face lit up with a smile of happiness. She asked Gavin, "Where are we going now?" Once Gavin heard what Zoe said, his gaze slowly darkened with hatred. In a deep, low voice, he said, "We are going to the Harper family for the birthday celebration." After a while, they arrived at Brookspring in the southern suburbs. There lay the most luxurious villa community in all of Brookspring. Almost every elite member of Brookspring's high society preferred to reside in this place. It appeared to be far from the city's hustle and bustle, but in reality, it was just a guise for a seemingly reclusive lifestyle. Very soon, they arrived at the Harper Villa. The Harper Villa stood on a hillside in the southern suburbs. In fact, almost the entire hill belonged to the Harper family. Right in the middle of the villa complex, there was a lively scene with people bustling around, and the place was lit up as if it were Christmas. The reason was quite simple. This day marked the 80th birthday of Samuel Harper, the current head of the Harper family. At the moment, Samuel was seated in the main hall of the Harper Villa, with his face beaming. He was dressed in a red traditional suit. He watched as guests came and went. All of them offered him birthday wishes. At the entrance of the hall, a servant with a booming voice continuously announced the gifts brought by these guests. Representing Pinnacle Enterprises, the chairman brings birthday greetings to Mr. Samuel with 2 gold bars, each weighing 10 pounds. Representing Degram Pharmaceuticals, the chairman brings birthday greetings to Mr. Samuel with 5 nourishing pills. Representing Lilicy Garments, the chairman brings birthday greetings to Mr. Samuel with a gift of $200,000. These announcements echoed throughout the room. As Samuel listened to these lavish gifts, he maintained a bright smile on his face. But the very next moment, the voice of the servant announcing at the entrance seemed to change dramatically. A deep, hoarse voice filled with boundless hostility resonated through the Harper Villa. The Clifford family from Brookspring came here to wish Mr. Samuel a happy birthday. This voice rumbled like thunder. It reverberated in the sky above the Harper Villa. It lingered for a long time without dissipating. As soon as they heard the voice, everyone in the room was suddenly stunned. All eyes instinctively turned toward the entrance. Hearing that, they thought to themselves, the Clifford family from Brookspring. It had been a long time since they heard the Clifford family from Brookspring. The Clifford family from Brookspring had suffered a tragic annihilation many years ago, with the entire family meeting a grim end. Even the family estate had turned into ruins and became the burial ground of the Clifford family. But now, at the 80th birthday celebration of Samuel, someone had dared to claim the name of the Clifford family from Brookspring. What a dreadful omen this was. They wondered whether this person was wishing for the same fate for the Harper family as the Clifford family at Samuel's 80th birthday celebration. Samuel, who was seated at the head of the table, immediately gripped the armrest and stood up with a sharp clang. His brow furrowed, and his eyes were filled with anger. As the head of the Harper family, he certainly could sense the ominous atmosphere since everyone else could. Moreover, what others didn't know was that the Harper family had been involved in the tragic annihilation of the Clifford family many years ago. This was like a direct slap to Samuel's face on his 80th birthday celebration. At this moment, a few members of the Harper family rushed forward to console Samuel. Among them, one middle-aged man sternly spoke up. He exclaimed, "Xavier, go and see what is going on." After hearing what he said, a well-groomed young man stepped forward. Xavier Harper was the 3rd-generation offspring of the Harper family, and he was none other than the eldest son of the Harper family. He was well aware of the connection between the annihilation of the Clifford family and the Harper family. Moreover, he was a key participant. The group that had hunted down Zoe at the Clifford family's estate was just sent by Xavier. With anger in his eyes, he approached the entrance of the hall. After that, he shouted, "Damn it! Who is the idiot causing trouble at the Harper family? Have you had enough?" Just as he was about to finish his sentence, that low, hoarse voice, which was just like the roar of a lion, rang out again. "I'm Gavin Clifford, from the Clifford family of Brookspring." Gavin. All the people in the hall, including the Harper family, gasped, and their eyes widened with shock. Their pupils dilated. All of them exclaimed, "Gavin." One of them asked, "Is he the former eldest son of the Clifford family?" Another person replied, "Is he still alive? Wasn't he supposed to be dead a long time ago?" People were abuzz with discussions, and even the members of the Harper family displayed surprised expressions. At the same time, Xavier spoke up again. He shouted, "Just show up. Stop pretending. Gavin died a decade ago." Boom! Just as Xavier uttered those words, a sudden air vibration sounded. Xavier was instantly horrified when he saw an enormous black object materialize out of thin air and hurtle toward him. After that, he screamed and then flung himself aside. Boom! A deafening sound echoed through the hall as a massive coffin landed squarely in the center of the Harper Villa. It caused a cloud of dust. It was at this moment that Gavin's voice resonated again. He asked, "Samuel, are you satisfied with the 80th birthday gift the Clifford family is presenting to you?" With these words, Gavin's figure slowly emerged at the entrance of the Harper Villa's hall. He moved step by step toward the interior. "You fool!" Samuel's furious voice rang out. At this point, Samuel was trembling with anger as he stared at the coffin in the middle of the hall. His face changed to red and back to pale again. "Dad, calm down. Please don't let anger affect your health." The middle-aged man who asked Xavier to go out to investigate earlier hurriedly consoled Samuel. After that, he turned his angry gaze toward Gavin and pointed at him. He then shouted, "You audacious thug! How dare you cause trouble in the Harper family?" At the same time, Xavier, who had narrowly escaped the coffin's attack, managed to climb to his feet. As he glared at Gavin, who was nearby, he was extremely angry. He shouted with gritted teeth at Gavin, "Kid, you are asking for death." He then continued, "Someone beat this imbecile to a pulp." Crack. Before he could finish speaking, a resounding noise echoed. "Ah!" A cry of agony burst from his lips, and then blood sprayed into the air. Gavin had slapped Xavier so hard that half of Xavier's face was laid open. After that, Xavier tumbled through the air. He eventually crashed to the ground. He lay there convulsing and showed no signs of getting up. "Xavier!" A woman's horrified cry filled the air. A plump woman rushed forward from the crowd. She threw herself beside Xavier. She exclaimed, "Xavier, what happened to you? How ah?" The next moment, she let out a sharp scream. Her face turned ashen as she saw Xavier's half-shredded face with bones exposed. "Ah!" She let out a sharp scream once more. It was shrill and piercing. "You bastard! I will kill you! I will kill you!" After that, the woman angrily charged toward Gavin with gritted teeth. But in the next moment, the same sound rang out again. Crack! A crisp noise rang out, and the plump woman completed a full rotation in midair twice as blood splattered everywhere. She finally fell to the ground with no signs of life. "You!" After seeing this, the members of the Harper family standing in the depths of the hall were incensed, and they're burning with rage. The middle-aged man who had spoken earlier stepped forward. His voice was hoarse with fury as he shouted, "Kid, you dared to hurt my son and my wife. Someone, kill him, kill him." After he spoke, the servants and bodyguards of the Harper family brandished weapons and rushed forward. Gavin clenched his fists as he looked at the crowd closing in on him. Boom! With a loud noise, the ground beneath him suddenly cracked. Eyes were. Instantly, it was as if his body had turned into a flying dragon. In the next second, the room was filled with screams as people tumbled through the air. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen people from the Harper family who rushed out lay on the ground. At that moment, all the onlookers were shocked. An ordinary person definitely couldn't achieve this. Samuel's gaze suddenly tightened. After that, he exclaimed, "A warrior. He is actually a warrior. Hurry up, fetch Mr. Mason." At this moment, Gavin, who was unharmed, stood in the middle of the Harper Villa's grand hall. His body was tense, every muscle coiled with restrained anger. His eyes, cold and piercing, scanned the room, taking in the fallen bodies around him. All around him, these people had already fallen to the ground, their faces contorted in fear and pain, and their lifeless eyes stared into nothingness. The air was heavy with the stench of blood, a stark reminder of the violence that had unfolded in this once elegant hall. The sight of his enemies lying lifeless on the ground brought a twisted satisfaction to Gavin's heart. These individuals hadn't even come close to Gavin, yet they had met their inevitable fate. In the hall, the guests who had come to attend Samuel's birthday celebration were dumbfounded. They stared in shock and fear at Gavin, who stood proudly in the center of the hall. However, Gavin paid no attention to the gazes around him. Over the years, he had gotten used to terrified gazes like these. Things like this happened around him every day. Driven by fury and the strong desire to avenge his family's death, he only fixed his eyes on his enemy before him, not giving anyone else his attention. At the same time, on the floor, Xavier, the one Gavin had slapped away, slowly twitched and managed to lift himself up. His face was half covered in blood, and his eyes were empty. He looked dumbfounded as if he had no idea what had just happened. Thud, thud, thud. Footsteps echoed as Gavin approached. They sounded slow and stable, but everyone present felt the killing intent as they approached. which sent shivers down people's spine. Xavier's vacant gaze slowly shifted toward the source of the sound. He then realized that Gavin was walking toward him with an expressionless face. When Xavier saw Gavin's expressionless face, a sinister grin finally crept onto his face. He tried to speak, but the intense pain on his face made him scream. He cried out, "Ah!" Hearing Xavier's scream, Samuel, who was his grandfather, instantly spoke up. He exclaimed, "Xavier, are you okay? Are you okay? Kid, what are you trying to do? Don't come any closer." As Gavin approached Xavier, Gavin lowered his head and looked at Xavier with a blank expression. No one could tell what he was thinking at the moment, but it was obvious that he was enveloped by a strong killing intent. His hoarse voice sounded once more. He asked, "Are you Xavier? Are you the one who sent people to chase after my sister?" After hearing Gavin's cold voice, Xavier stared at him with his bloodshot eyes. At this moment, mixed feelings surged into his heart. There was fury, perplexity, despair, and grievance. However, one thing was for sure. There was no regret. He endured the excruciating pain and struggled to speak. He bellowed, seeming to have used up his energy. "You, scoundrel! How dare you strike me? I am Xavier, the young heir of the Harper family. The Harper family will make sure you are torn to pieces." Boom! Right after Xavier finished his words, he spat out a mouthful of blood. At that moment, Gavin's right foot arrived in front of Xavier's face. With a muffled thud, Xavier's head instantly exploded. "Xavier!" The Harper family members' screams echoed through the hall. After seeing that, Samuel and Xavier's father, Cameron Harper, the middle-aged man who spoke earlier, were seething with anger. Cameron's eyes turned red instantly. They were filled with sadness. He clenched his teeth and shouted, "Kid, I will make sure you meet a gruesome end. I will tear you to pieces." However, despite the outbursts, he didn't charge forward to confront Gavin. He did not even do as much as Xavier's mother had. After he heard the man speak, Gavin slowly turned his head. He locked his cold gaze on Cameron, Samuel, and the rest. His tone remained calm as he said coldly, "Don't rush. You will join him soon." After saying that, Gavin turned to face the Harper family. The guests who had gathered for Samuel's birthday celebration watched in horror as Xavier's gruesome fate unfolded. Seeing what happened to Xavier, many people felt a queasy sensation in their stomachs. Moreover, some of them even vomited. A few women, who were overwhelmed by fear, screamed, "Murder! Help! There is a murderer!" It seemed that Gavin was irritated by the chaos and cries. Gavin surveyed the room and then stated with a measured tone, "Today, I am here solely for the Harper family. All others, leave immediately." Gavin continued, "Otherwise, I will show no mercy." Upon hearing that, the guests nearby instantly paled. They were extremely terrified. In the next moment, they frantically shouted and scattered in all directions. Very soon, only the servants of the Harper family and the bloodline members of the Harper family remained in the grand hall. Gavin made no attempt to stop them. As he had stated, Gavin was there only for the Harper family. Once the others had fled, Gavin refocused his attention on Samuel and the others. His voice was cold as he spoke up. He asked, "Why did you want to annihilate the Clifford family?" After hearing Gavin's question, Samuel and the others flinched. Samuel immediately retorted with a stern tone, "You're talking nonsense. The Harper family has always abided by the law, and we would never commit murder or arson." The words came out as if Samuel couldn't believe them himself. From the embarrassment in his eyes when Samuel spoke, Gavin understood that Samuel was telling a lie. Gavin had no intention of repeating the question. He shook his head and said, "If that is the case, I will send you on your way." Just as Gavin finished his sentence, a deafening sound rang out. "How dare you!" The sound was so tremendous that it made the ordinary members of the Harper family present feel like their eardrums were about to burst. However, the Harper family members' faces lit up with intense joy when they heard that. After seeing that, Samuel even shouted aloud. He exclaimed, "Mr. Mason, you have finally arrived. Quickly kill him. He is Gavin, the remnant of the Clifford family from 10 years ago. Kill him." With his words, Samuel just contradicted himself. He had just claimed the Harper family's innocence regarding the massacre of the Clifford family. Yet now Gavin had instantly become the remnant of the Clifford family in his eyes. A gust of wind swept through the hall. A middle-aged man, who appeared to be in his 40s, appeared out of thin air in the hall of the Harper villa. As he stood between Gavin and the Harper family, he gazed at Gavin with cold eyes. He seemed to be sizing up Gavin. Following that, a smug smile appeared in his eyes. He then spoke to Gavin. He asked, "Are you a warrior?" The tone of his voice implied disbelief. Gavin didn't respond to his question. The man, Gabriel Mason, stared at Gavin with a more pronounced look of disdain. He continued, "You don't have the slightest hint of inner energy. Even if you are a warrior, you're nothing more than a low-level warrior. If you weren't a remnant of the Clifford family, I wouldn't even bother wasting my time with a low-level warrior like you." His tone made it seem as if engaging with Gavin, a warrior he considered worthless, would be a stain on his honor. However, at that moment, Gavin raised an eyebrow and turned to Gabriel. He asked, "So were you involved in the slaughter of the Clifford family?" Huh. After hearing that, Gabriel had a sneer on his face. He replied, "The Clifford family is nothing but bastards. Don't worry, I will send you to reunite with them soon." After Gabriel said that, his aura underwent a sudden transformation. His clothes began to flutter without any apparent wind. After that, he roared, "Die!" Instantly, he soared into the air and charged directly at Gavin. The Harper family members watched this from behind. They expressed delight as soon as they saw this scene. In there, Gavin had already turned into a hideous corpse. With a fierce and powerful punch, Gabriel aimed for Gavin's face. At that moment, Gabriel and the Harper family members expected Gavin's head to explode. In the next moment, a soft sound rang out. Gavin nonchalantly caught Gabriel's forceful punch with a single hand. Gabriel was horrified to discover that all of his unleashed power had suddenly disappeared. Moreover, Gavin had firmly immobilized him in place with just one hand, rendering him powerless to struggle. The Harper family members couldn't figure out what had happened. They witnessed this scene with bewildered expressions. Xavier's father, Cameron, then spoke up. He asked, "Mr. Mason, what are you waiting for? Just kill him." After Cameron finished his words, a cracking sound followed. Crack. Ah. After that, a blood-curdling scream resounded. However, this agonizing scream did not come from Gavin. A piercing scream erupted from Gabriel's mouth, and his face twisted in agony. His eyes, wide with shock, seemed to well up with an intense and primal fear, as he clutched at his chest with trembling, white-knuckled hands. Gavin, with a single hand, shockingly crushed Gabriel's massive right fist. It caused Gabriel's bone fragments and blood to scatter through the air. Gabriel cried out, "Ah, my hand, my hand." Gabriel clutched his injured hand in pain, and his forehead veins bulged as he hastily retreated. Beads of sweat gathered on his furrowed brow, glistening in the dim light. At that moment, the Harper family members who were unaware of the situation finally realized why Gabriel had let out such a painful scream. It was because his right hand was gone. All that remained on his arm was a spray of blood. What? Samuel's eyes widened in disbelief. He was stunned and took a step back, but he was relatively composed compared to other people. As for Cameron and the others, they staggered back 3 steps, and their faces were etched with fear. They were well aware of Gabriel's immense strength. All the Harper family's bodyguards and servants combined were no match for Gabriel. However, at this moment, with just one exchange, Gavin had crushed Gabriel's fist. This was hard to believe. Gavin, a man who had been missing for a decade, actually possessed such incredible power. At this moment, Gabriel trembled with pain all over his body, and his eyes were filled with a look of terror. He nervously spoke up and said to Gavin, "Sir." Indeed, since Gabriel couldn't gauge Gavin's strength, and Gavin had easily incapacitated him after one exchange, it was appropriate for him to address Gavin respectfully. Gabriel continued, "Sir, you're here to kill the Harper family. But I'm not from the Harper family. I'm just a guest of the Harper family. Sir, I have nothing to do with them. If you want to kill the Harper family, just do it. I won't bother you. Please spare me." Gabriel's attitude had taken a complete turn. Just moments ago, he had been disdainful, and he was ready to kill Gavin and send him to join the deceased members of the Clifford family. However, after a single strike, he was eager to distance himself from the Harper family. The Harper family members were taken aback by Gabriel's plea. Cameron even shouted out in anger. He asked Mr. Mason, "What are you saying? The Harper family has been pampering you with food and giving you everything you desire. We even provide you with $200,000 in cash every month. And now, at this critical moment, you want to distance yourself from the Harper family." Before he could finish speaking, Gabriel spoke up and interrupted him. He retorted, "What are you talking about? You gave me money and things willingly. I never asked for any of it. Furthermore, when someone takes a life, he must be prepared to lose his own. You all had a part in eradicating the Clifford family back then. And now, a member of the Clifford family is killing you. It is only fair." After uttering this statement, Gabriel ignored the furious glare of the Harper family members and turned to Gavin with a placid expression. He asked, "Sir, would you agree? Isn't that reasonable?" At the same time, Samuel, who was standing in the background, unleashed a furious roar. He shouted out, "Ah, Mr. Mason, you damn traitor. If the Harper family falls today, you won't survive either. Don't forget your involvement in the Clifford family's affairs." "Bullshit," Gabriel retorted. He turned and shouted at Samuel in a hoarse voice. The two of them actually started arguing when they were facing Gavin. Gabriel cried out, "I knew nothing about what happened back then. You can all rot for all I care. I'm leaving." After saying that, Gabriel abruptly turned and dashed toward a window in the hall, as if he were fleeing for his life. But just at that moment, a ghostly voice rang out once again. "Did I say you could leave?" After Gabriel heard those words, his entire body trembled, and his face turned deathly pale. Moreover, cold sweat poured down his forehead. However, he dared not look back. His eyes were fixated on the massive window. He couldn't help but think to himself, "I must escape. If I can get out, I will survive." However, at that moment, his hopeful expression dimmed. A figure resembling death appeared by the window. It was Gavin. In the next instant, Gavin raised his foot. With a thud, Gabriel's chest collided with Gavin's foot. Suddenly, a mouthful of blood was spat out. At that moment, Gabriel coughed up blood. He flew backward and landed heavily on the ground. He shouted out, "Ah!" As he lay on the ground, Gabriel spat out another mouthful of blood. In the next moment, he gazed up at Gavin, who was approaching. He said in a trembling voice, "This is Dark Warrior. Is this the technique of the Dark Warrior? Are you a Frost Peak Dark Warrior?" In the next moment, he shook his pale face repeatedly. He then said, "Impossible. It's absolutely impossible. 10 years ago, the Frost Peak Dark Warriors perished alongside the 30-power Allied forces at Sunspire. It's absolutely impossible for them to have survived. Impossible. It's absolutely impossible." Whether it was possible or not no longer mattered. Gavin had already arrived at Gabriel's side and raised his foot high. Seeing Gavin's impending fatal strike, Gabriel panicked. He shouted out, "You can't kill me. I'm from the Mason family of Greenwald. If you kill me..." Gabriel then spat out a mouthful of blood. Before Gabriel could finish his words, Gavin's right foot viciously pierced through his chest. As for what would happen to Gavin after killing Gabriel, Gavin didn't care about it at all. After all, Gabriel had already died. After all that, Gavin turned slowly and directed his cold gaze toward the Harper family members. Seeing that, every person from the Harper family quivered. A series of sounds then followed. Except for Samuel and Cameron, every member of the Harper family kneeled. They pleaded frenziedly in Gavin's direction. They shouted desperately, "Mr. Clifford, please don't kill us. We acknowledge our wrongs. Truly we do. We shouldn't have killed the members of the Clifford family back then. We will make amends. We will compensate the Clifford family." This group of people kneeled on the ground and begged loudly. After all, in their eyes, Gabriel was the most powerful person they knew. However, he was killed with a single kick by Gavin. As ordinary individuals, they certainly couldn't stand a chance against Gavin. At the same time, Samuel and Cameron fumed as they watched their relatives prostrate themselves before their enemy. Samuel's face contorted in a mixture of frustration and anger. His brows furrowed, creating deep creases on his forehead, and his lips curled into a sneer. The room seemed to grow colder as the tension thickened. Samuel shouted out, "Damn it, get up. Are you a bunch of idiots even worthy of being part of the Harper family?" But the Harper family members who were begging for mercy were too consumed by the imminent threat to care about anything else. Someone even turned to Samuel and Cameron and shouted, "Cameron, Dad, please kneel down and beg for mercy. At least we might survive and have a chance. Stop talking nonsense." Samuel cursed before suddenly erupting into violent coughing. Each cough was a raw, rasping explosion of sound, echoing through the room. His eyes watered with pain and irritation, and his face turned a shade of crimson as he struggled for breath. He then spewed a mouthful of blood. "Dad!" Cameron rushed to his father's side. With trembling hands, Cameron reached out to support his father. His fingers gently gripped Samuel's shoulders. His face was etched with a mix of fear and concern. He stared at Samuel's ashen face with bloody streaks at the corners of his mouth. After seeing what happened, Cameron clenched his teeth. The corners of his lips curled downwards, forming a tight, straight line that revealed his simmering anger. His jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his face seemed to twitch, which conveyed the intensity of his emotional turmoil. He shouted, "You damn traitor! I will kill you!" Samuel bellowed and then turned. He reached behind Cameron and pulled out a shotgun hidden under the table. After that, he aimed it directly at Gavin's head. Cameron had a sinister grin on his face. His eyes turned red as he looked at Gavin. He shouted, "Gavin, you bastard of the Clifford family. Why didn't you die at Sunspire 10 years ago? All members of the Clifford family are bastards. They don't deserve to live in this world. So you have to die too. You bastard. You have to die too. I admit you are a formidable warrior, but can you stop bullets?" As he finished speaking, a burst of flames erupted. Boom! At this moment, over a dozen pellets shot out from the shotgun. They were heading straight for Gavin.